Well, taking the time to do stuff like this, hearing other people's stories, is a very important step in building those inclusive environments. So, I'm going to start. Today, we're going to consider why inclusive teaching is increasingly important. We're going to define what it means to teach for inclusion and equity. I'm going to introduce you, and I've already done this a little bit, to the Inclusive Pedagogy Academy, just so you know that that's going on around campus. If you hear about it, this is what it is. And then we're going to brainstorm ideas about ways that you would implement best practices in inclusive teaching. So I want to start by doing, asking you to find a piece of paper around you and to write on this question just for about a minute. Why are there more and more calls for faculty to use inclusive teaching practices? Just as I walked out of the office today, Chronicle of Higher Education, traditional teaching may deepen inequality. Can different approaches fix it? I see this every day. So write on this question. Okay, I know you've only had about a minute to write, and that's okay. So I want you to partner up. Turn to the person next to you, and I want you to talk to them about what you wrote. And I would like each of you to take a minute to explain your answer to the other person. I'll time it, and I'll tell you when to switch. If there's an odd, you can do 3. Yeah. Okay, switch so someone else can talk. If one person is talking, switch. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a little bit more for the groups that are a bit larger, but try to switch. Okay. Everybody, let's come back together. I know you're not done yet. Hopefully you'll still be thinking about it. So we just have time for a couple of people to share. What did you hear or what did you say to answer this question? Does anybody want to share? Shay.
I wrote that education is a project built on colonialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. And as we pointed out, there's a ball for the long go.
This is a very Shay answer if you don't know Shay.
We actually open the doors
Yeah.
to this institution. We actually have to subvert it if we want to make it.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Anybody else want to share? Yeah. Jamie.
A little bit by what Peter said, which was that there's this heightened awareness of this, and that the students are aware of what Shay put so eloquently, and that, in a sense, they are clients, and if the client's unhappy, we have to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to point out that both of you are taking ownership of this and saying, hey, the fault is in us. You know, it's here with us. Because this is what you two have articulated is very different often from what typically has been called the deficit perspective, which is has anybody heard this term? Shay has. Peter, can you? How would you describe the deficit perspective? Or
one way, because I came from a symposium recently on deficit fatigue, and they mentioned for a deficit. So I guess the different ways you can look at it, but one was particularly based on the lack of interest in doing many of these things, and looking at the gaps that they have in terms of the inequities, and stating that we can never really get to this because some of the deficits that we have are inherent. And it's just always going to be there. That was one perspective that I really it was really troubling for me.
Yeah, just kind of accepting it. Like, okay, we have this deficit, and how do we deal with it? Another way of thinking about it too is typically and traditionally there's been a tendency to look at students and to say they're at fault. They're underprepared. They're not college ready. They are the deficit. So what Shay and Jamie are articulating to me is particularly interesting because that's saying, wait a minute, maybe the deficit is with us, at least part of it. And so we need to address it within. It's not just students. We have to kind of understand that this is a two-way street and we have to deal with it ourselves. Who else wants to offer anything up on this question? Yeah. Yeah. The social context and the stakes. Yeah, because there are problems. There is a lot of attention on higher education and why students aren't succeeding in this context. And so thinking about that. What else? What other stakes?
I think we were acknowledging that the general agreement about what higher ed is for is very much under attack.
Yes.
And that you expect you guys to sort of show what you stand for. I think was a feeling.
Definitely. Okay. Caitlin?
I want to say thank you for that comment, but I want to expand it. You keep saying just higher education. I would say the stakes overall for education in general are right now. So rather than thinking about just we're in higher education, we need to protect higher education. Think about education in a larger context and protecting what education stands for. Thinking about from a K through 16 perspective, education has stood for some terrible things in the past, and we have hope for what it could stand for.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that much broader perspective. All right. So one of the reasons that there is this increasing focus on inclusive practices is also because our student demographics are changing really radically. So more than ever before, students today are more likely to be female, a transfer student, low income, part-time, a person of color, older, working, less academically prepared, and come from families that have little or no college experience. Now, what we know, based on research, is that each of these characteristics is independently associated with low rates of college attendance and low rates of degree attainment as well. So if these students are coming into our classrooms, this is what we need to address. Our student body is changing. So at CU Denver, like, to what extent does this demographic that I just put up represent who our student body is? So at CU Denver, 50% of our new freshmen are first-generation college students. 59% of our new freshmen are students of color. 49% of new undergraduates are transfer students. 50% of graduates are Pell Grant recipients, which means low income. 53% of our students are female. The average age of our students is 23.4 years old, which in contrast to Boulder, the average Boulder student age is 20.1 years old. So our students on average are older. And 28% of our students attend part-time. So if these are our students, and this demographic represents our students, I want you to take another minute and write on this question. Do you think that having one or more of these sociocultural identities shapes the student college experience, and if so, how? And I'll give you 1 minute. Okay, so now I want you to talk to somebody you didn't talk to last time. Move around if you have to. And we'll have 1 minute or 2 minutes sharing what you came up with on this question. Somebody you didn't talk to last time. Find somebody.
Focus mostly on those students that are so that's mainly what I focused on this past semester. Which I wish
Okay, switch up if you haven't switched to let somebody else talk. Okay, I know you guys might not be done yet, but let's get back together. Okay, let's get back together. Who wants to share? We'll do a quick share. What, either something you heard or something you said? Yeah, Jamie.
So one of the big things that I wrote down, because I wrote my thesis on this, because I mentioned my legacy, because I'm the fourth of 5 kids, and my 2 older siblings did go to college and they dropped out after a year. And one of the first things that I had learned was I didn't know about FAFSA. I didn't know what that was. I had just heard about getting student loans through TV. So I was taking out private loans for my first year. And I didn't know that these things were even an issue. I just assumed that, because everybody talks about student loans, and that was where I got my information about them from. So I wrote down 3 things. It was not having information when you fall into one of those categories, but more so not knowing that you don't have that information, not knowing where to find that information. So at my institution, we didn't have a financial aid office. We had a one-stop shop. That was literally the title of it. So that included bursar, that included financial aid, that included our registrar, that included everyone. And so even when I would hear about things like financial aid or bursar or stuff like that, I didn't know where to find those on my campus. And then just not knowing how to ask for it, not knowing that I could even ask for things like that. And then one of the other things that we talked about was, one of my goals in my new role is to introduce students to faculty members more quickly, more frequently, because I feel like they're seen as they're seen as faculty. That's the truth, and so they're untouchable. So one of the biggest complaints from faculty is, students don't come to us, they just don't talk to us. We can't really relate to them, and so I want to try and get at least students to realize that they're people. They will come and talk. If you let them, faculty members will talk to you all day long about everything. And so to get them to understand that it's okay to talk to them, it's okay to meet with them. So yeah, do I think it's important that these gaps exist? Yes.
Yeah, they definitely do. And hopefully, we're kind of running short on time, so I want to move on, but hopefully you learned something from the conversations that you had and that you were able to identify those things. So in my own thinking about this and kind of working with the faculty in the IPA, it seemed to me, and from my disciplinary background, that I thought that there were 3 main forces that shape student experiences when a student is from one of the demographic groups that we talked about. There are practical matters that shape their experiences, psychosocial matters, and cultural matters. And I think there probably are more than this, but this is how I'm organizing it in my mind right now. So by practical matters, I mean these students may have less academic preparation. They may have attended schools that are lower performing schools. They may lack study skills for self-directed learning as well. And they may attend school part-time and work in addition to their work. And they may have fewer financial resources. The psychosocial matters that shape these students' experiences is they may feel the effects of microaggressions, which can lead to a lack of belonging. So there's a lot of talk about microaggression, those very small statements that make you feel like you shouldn't be here or you don't belong in school. They may lack connectedness to other students. If they're working, for example, and they're not on campus as much, they may not have the opportunities to be involved in the same sorts of extracurricular activities or have time to stay after class or be part of that group work that happens after class. So again, that sense of belonging. These students may experience alienation from their family and community if they're first-generation college students. I know when I was going to college, I came from Michigan. people in my family would say, why don't you just get a job at the shop, which meant the GM factory down the road, you know? So a lot of times there are those disconnections that as you start to move in a different direction, you may feel that. But you also might feel the opposite. Your family may have all of their hopes riding on you that you're going to be the first in the family to graduate from college. So I don't want this to sound deficit-y, because a lot of it is their families can be strong support as well. It may be different. These students may feel anxiety associated with stereotype threat. That you walk in the classroom and you're a woman walking into a physics classroom, everybody's going to think I can't do this because I'm a woman and women don't do physics. So that can cause anxiety, which can lead to changes in your performance as well. And if you guys haven't read Claude Steele's Whistling Vivaldi, I encourage you to do so. It's a great book on stereotype threat. Some students may be more invested in their work identities. If they're older students coming back to school, they might be more invested in that than school identities as well. Cultural matters. Many of these students could be unfamiliar with the cultural norms, the rules, the languages of the university. How could they not know what a syllabus is? You know, you could start like there, but they don't. So you need to take a step back and talk about those kinds of things in explicit ways. They may not be familiar with support services that are available to them. They may, their responsibilities at school can be at odds with their family responsibilities and expectations. They may be motivated by responsibilities to do well for their families and for their communities. This can be like a fantastic, huge asset as you think about like how do you create assignments that speak to students' interests, often rooting those kinds of things and your lectures and whatever in those student experiences are ways to connect and to motivate them because they are strongly connected with their students or with their communities. Other cultural matters. Culturally based gender identities can be at odds with disciplinary identities and expectations, and that can cause conflict as the student moves through a program. These students may have class or culturally specific discursive styles. So Native American communities, there's hundreds of tribes across the country, but in some Native American communities, making eye contact is considered disrespectful to an elder, to someone in a position of authority. A professor can read that in a particular way, but to that student may be showing respect. So ways of speaking, ways of expressing themselves, whether people speak up or not, is culturally bound. And we need to remember that there is a diversity of ways of doing those things. These students may be less likely to interact with faculty members out of concerns for looking dumb, being demanding, or being disrespectful. And these students may be accustomed to working with others rather than competing with others, so have much more of a collective kind of approach to their work. So, yeah.
With this last point, how do you use that with the program?
Working with one another rather than competing.
Yes, I just want to challenge that because I don't know that we necessarily want to encourage them to compete with peers.
Yes, but often in classes, I mean, you think about it, a lot of classes are structured as very competitive venues, you know, that students seem to be encouraged to compete with one another rather than to cooperate. So the challenge here would be, how do you make sure that you structure your classroom so that people work together and everybody wins, that you have kind of more of that team cooperative approach rather than, so if you grade on a curve, for example, grading on a curve is a great example. All of the literature suggests don't do that because you create that competition. Somebody's going to lose and somebody's going to win. All right, so we're almost out of time. I want to pass on to you, or we've already talked about this a little bit. I want to pass on to you, just before we leave, 13 best practices in teaching for inclusion. So I'm going to, would you hand these out? Hand those out. I'm going to hand them out, but I'm going to read them to you as I'm handing out. Best practice number 1, encourage students to interact and learn from one another. Best practice number 2, Give students opportunities to think and to talk about your discipline. Have them interact with one another. Best practice number 3, encourage and actively manage the participation of all students. So one of the things you noticed when you guys were working in groups, I said somebody talk for 1 minute and then rotate, because there's always dominators. There's always people who get left out of that conversation. So even though it sounds like there's broad participation, creating structured activities where people rotate the responsibilities. Best practice number 4, let students know that struggle and challenge are an important part of learning. That it's okay to fail and it's okay to stumble. That is all part of the process. Best practice number 5, encourage students to understand how they learn. More and more, it's important to show students, how do you read a scholarly article? What do you do when you encounter words you don't know? How do you take notes? Best practice number 6, establish professional, caring, and supportive relationships with your students. Develop a good classroom climate so students feel that they can approach you. Best practice number 7, get to know the learning needs of your students and align that with your instruction with their needs. Best practice number 8, keep lessons and assessment relevant. Root it in student experiences. Give them choices for the assignments that they do so they can connect it with their everyday lives. Best practice number 9, vary your instruction and assessment strategies to address different ways of learning. So offer people different ways of doing an assignment. Best practice number 10, establish clear expectations for performance, assignment, and classroom interaction. Best practice number 11, give students opportunities to practice. Lots and lots of practice. Don't expect them to take the test and just perform really well on the test. Give them quizzes every week leading up to that test if that's the way that you're assessing their knowledge. Students need that practice. Be mindful of students' social, cultural, and economic backgrounds. Learn about your students. Seek to know them. And best practice number 13, be mindful of your own social, cultural, and economic background, because who you are shapes the climate, the culture, your classroom. All right, so I think we're over time. We're done. I'm sorry for running late. I'm sorry for giving you this at the last minute, but I hope that, that you can use these in your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.